Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. When I was about 10, I got a translation of the Arabian Nights out of the library. In the introduction, there was a quote. It said, "There are three kinds of people in this world: the happy, the wise, and the fools. The happy are those who learn from their own mistakes. The wise are those who learn from the mistakes of others, and the fools are those who learn nothing at all." In our current society, wisdom is not very fashionable.
Not at all.
And yet, without it...
You'd be up the booah without a paddle.
Exactly. And so, today, I'd like to look at what wisdom is, why we need it, and where we start in obtaining it.
Okay, so I like to start with definitions. What is wisdom?
I think wisdom is the ability to apply what we believe in our everyday lives. And so it starts with a philosophical base of how we think.
A lot of people would think wisdom's, wise sayings. So if you know those wise sayings, if you have knowledge, isn't that wisdom?
Well, you need understanding as well.
And that's the key thing, is wisdom is not just knowledge. It's understanding or discernment as well. There's an assumption there as well that you're assuming that there is a good and a not so good. You're assuming there is a choice and that some choices are better than other choices.
And that's why I think that it's unfashionable in our modern society, because wisdom is dependent on there being a truth. And our culture says there's your truth and my truth.
It's all
and
relative.
Truth is relative. Yes.
Yeah, which is not true.
Well, you can't obtain wisdom if you subscribe to that view.
Because there is no way of making distinctions between...
Or discerning
what is good and what is bad.
What is wise and what is foolish.
What is wise and what is foolish, yes. And then you end up with people will end up saying, oh, well, they're in this position through no fault of their own. But really, was it really through no fault of their own?
There are occasions when, yes, it's no fault of their own. But I remember seeing a meme and it said, everything happens for a reason. And sometimes the reason is you're stupid and make bad decisions.
Yes. That is definitely an unfashionable viewpoint. Because we always want to blame something else. It's never our fault. It's always someone else's fault.
That's a much easier emotional attitude to take, but it doesn't produce wisdom.
And that is also why it's unfashionable, because it requires hard work. It requires us to examine ourselves in detail and uncover things about ourselves that we might not like.
And to think about the definition in the Arabian Nights, it's that you learn from the mistake of others. You looking at things around you, not today, but also in the past, what has worked and what hasn't. And that will help you to discern the right way forward. And so if a system has worked for thousands of years, maybe there's something to it.
Yes, this is sort of an argument that things that we might write off in contemporary culture as superstitious or old-fashioned beliefs, that those beliefs would have only developed if they conferred some advantage. And so you don't necessarily dismiss something because it's old-fashioned, because maybe it might save your life someday.
Well, it also reminds me of one time when I was quite enjoying not going out and staying and watching Miss Marple and knitting at that point in time. And I said to my mum, oh, I'm being such a nana. And she said, did it ever occur to you that the reason why nanas do these things is because it's taken them their whole lives to work out what's good? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, it's only knitting and watching Miss Marple, but there is something that we can learn and from people who are older than us, they are often the ones who we should be looking for and learning from the lessons of their lives. It can be things like sometimes it's what not to do.
Yes.
Sometimes it is what to do. So that's the learning from the mistakes of others, respecting and observing the older generations. And for that, there's also the passing on of knowledge that we often don't have, or that we often don't encourage so much. People want to read it all in a book rather than actually gaining knowledge and life experience from those who've been there before you.
Yes. So one of the main reasons is that we need to be able to learn to move forward. Sort of an element of this also is the concept of law or the law, insofar as, again, it's sort of building upon there being a truth, but if there is a truth, then there are good decisions and bad decisions. Therefore, there are certain laws that are really natural laws, even that are, I'm not talking about, I mean, we have human laws, but they can just simply be arbitrary and
cultural.
And cultural. But there are some laws that are really natural laws that are pretty much universal.
Yes.
And that is another reason that we need to develop wisdom, is to, not just for ourselves, but to be able to exist as a society, as a community, without tearing ourselves apart.
I think with that, it comes to, if you think wisely, you will live wisely. So if your thinking is sound, it will affect the way you live, and that will affect our culture.
So how do we do that? Where do we start? Where do you start to accumulate wisdom, or where do you start the process of becoming a wise person, or a person who seeks after wisdom?
Well, I think that's the start. Wisdom begins when you want to learn.
You have to choose wisdom.
Sincerely, when you sincerely want to learn. And it's a process. I don't think you ever get there.
You're never going to choose wisdom and all of a sudden, poof, you're wise.
Yeah, it's not like you graduate with a degree in wisdom.
No.
You're not going to ever be like, I'm the wise person here. You know, you have to, it's always a process. Even people who do generally live wisely can
still make a foolish decision.
Absolutely, because we're human.
Yeah.
But I think if we were seeking to live wisely and to think wisely, then over time it's going to become more of that and less of foolishness.
I'm reminded of the story of Solomon's choice as well at this point, where Solomon, ancient king of Israel, was asked by God, I can give you anything you want. You want riches? I will give you riches. You want power? Fame? I'll give it to you. And Solomon thought for a bit, and he came back and he said, I want wisdom. And God's reply was, because you have chosen wisdom, these other things will also be given to you.
Interestingly enough, his reason for choosing wisdom was not for himself. He wanted to be wise, to be a good king.
Yes.
And I think that's also an interesting thing, is that there was not selfishness in his desire for wisdom.
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting point there in that in that story he got power and wealth because he chose wisdom. So wisdom will give you good things. But for us, we might choose wisdom and not get power and wealth. But we just might get a life well lived, or a beautiful life.
I think also, if we are seeking after wisdom, the world is going to become a better place.
Yes.
Because people are, the way they're living will be changed.
I mean, that's a whole new topic in and of itself, the selfishness that we see in the world around us. But but what you're also saying is that's intimately linked with the lack of wisdom.
Yes.
That a lot of the selfishness that we see around us is because people are acting unwisely and they don't realise that they're hurting themselves and the people around them.
And I think also it comes back to this thing of BBC, belief, behaviour, culture.
Yes.
How we think, what we believe will affect how we live and that will build a better world, a better society, a better culture. And so wisdom is a
cornerstone.
It's cornerstone of belief that we need to cultivate in ourselves, that if we are aiming for the best possible society.
Yeah, in earlier podcasts we talk about the virtues, the 4 Stoic virtues, and then plus the 3 Christian virtues added into those. And wisdom is one of the Stoic virtues. It's a virtue in every culture, wisdom. And it is this first principle that everything else is built upon. And it's part of the reason why we held off from doing this podcast for a long time, because what is there that you can say about wisdom that has not already been said? What can you say that is advances things? But that's not what we're actually trying to do here today. We're really just doing Wisdom 101. We're not wise as a society, and we need to get back to it. It's not fashionable. We need to make it fashionable again, but we have to choose it. So here's a question. Why focus on being wise? Why not just be happy being happy?
Well, I think that's the second best option. To bring it back to the Arabian Nights, the happy are those who learn from their own mistakes. And I think if you're not going to learn from the mistakes of others, that's the second best option. You're still learning something.
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing, is that we do have to learn from mistakes.
And that's the starting point.
And we can choose whether we are going to be the ones who are having to make all the same mistakes again, or whether we can actually, there's a little bit of cutting to the chase here. You can learn from the mistakes of others.
Take a shortcut.
Yes, a shortcut.
I often used to say as a young man to myself, a mistake is not a mistake if you learn from it. And it's along those lines. You're trying to...
I think a mistake is not wasted if you learn from it.
Still a mistake, but it's not wasted.
Yeah.
So don't waste your mistakes.
Yes, learn from them. And if we all can consider whether wisdom is something that we want to have in our societies, a virtue that we're going to hold up as something to seek, then...
to value, to consider a good.
It just might be a revolutionary act.
Just might be. Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.